Chapter 4, this video will focus on internal controls. What a weird phrase. This idea is that we want things to function inside of a company and that those that have access to certain financial records have them. Those that have access to cash have them. But we have overlapping responsibilities, kind of like federal and state governments, that there's a balance of powers, right, between the executive, judiciary, and legislative branches. If one of those branches had all the power, it would be out of balance and there would be fraud and corruption. But as it is, well, there's still fraud and corruption, never mind that example. But within a company, we want to have checks and balances to at least help reduce the likelihood of fraud and corruption. And if it does happen, a lot more people have to be involved in it, and it's more likely to be found out. Anyway, so that's the backdrop. Let's get into this. So the idea with internal controls is to help reduce incorrect financial statements. Two reasons why we can have incorrect financial statements. One is just errors that are always going to happen. The other is fraud that's also always going to happen, but we want to try and reduce that and reduce opportunities for fraud and also reduce instances of errors. So here's the fraud triangle: motivation, some motivation to commit fraud, needing more money or want to look better or something in the company. Opportunity, that there's no checks and balances so they can take the opportunity. And justification, a common one is, well, the company's not going to miss it. They're really big. I'll pay it back before anybody notices. It's not really that bad, stuff like that. A way to remember this is that criminals want more. The motivation, opportunity, rationalization, they want more. That's one way to remember the fraud triangle. So internal controls are ways that companies try to eliminate the opportunity to commit fraud. Safeguarding the assets, improving accuracy and reliability of accounting information. So one of the big things is called Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX, or SARBOX. It's known by these different phrases. So there were somewhere in like 2000, 2001, a whole bunch of scandals by managers, by mid-level folks, by lots of people in huge companies. Enron, WorldCom were some of the big ones. Top executives were in on it. They failed to properly monitor, failed to have good internal controls inside the company. It was really bad. Enron avoided reporting billions in debts. WorldCom misclassified expenditures. And so this federal law, Sarbanes-Oxley, SARBOX, was passed in 2002. And I put in red here, federal regulations are written in the blood of their victims, dramatically. If you think about the amount of work it takes and just the level of leveled upness it is for a federal regulation to get passed, it means that whatever is going wrong was so bad that the federal government has to get involved to do something. In this case, it wasn't blood, but it was money that was lost. And actually, some people did end their lives early because their financial ruin and stock market crash and all these things. But also, I think it was coined in regards to like health and protection, safety on the job, OSHA type requirements that every type of requirement they have, like wearing hard hats. Well, enough people had things fall on them and kill them before a regulation was put in place to require hard hats, and having safety harnesses when climbing up heights, that enough people fell off skyscrapers and fell to their death or to serious physical injury for them to require to be locked in. So that kind of idea, if there's a federal law in place, then something was so bad that it rose to that level. So Sarbanes-Oxley established guidelines related to internal controls and audit client relationships. And here's some of the major things that it put in place. Having an oversight board, the PCAOB, they set up oversight over auditing control standards because the accounting profession had been mostly self-monitored, and it completely failed with regards to independence of the auditors, oversight, making sure that executives were really doing their job and providing good guidance for it. And then corporate executive accountability, that the CEO and CFO have to sign their names to the financial statements. If they're wrong, they face huge fines and even jail time. Non-auditing services, auditors cannot also perform related consulting services like investing, because they were Arthur Andersen for Enron particularly provided all this consulting advice on how to set up different tax planning schemes, and then went back to audit them. Well, they weren't independent. They were completely biased and in favor of Enron because they had advised them on how to do all these things. So it was a complete disaster. Retention of work papers, auditors have to hold on to these things for 7 years or face prison sentences. Audit rotation, the lead partner, and some of these huge companies have multiple audit teams working on something, but the lead company has to rotate off every 5 years so that they can't get so ingrained and cook up some really big fraud and never be found out, that at least every 5 years there's going to be some rotation there. Yeah, it helps eliminate conflict of interest. Hiring audit goes to the audit committee, not the CEO. And then internal controls, our focus here, that company management has to document the effectiveness, review the effectiveness of internal controls to make sure that they're working effectively. All right, so key point, SOX put in a variety of guidelines related to audit client relationships and internal controls. All right, so the components of internal controls here, building up from the bottom, is the control environments, the overall tone of the company. Is there just an environment of doing things right, of checking the boxes, not taking shortcuts, yeah, making sure that we're putting things in place, that there's checks and balances so that things are done right. A risk assessment is something that is done by the audit team to review risk factors that are relevant to the company or in the industry, related to the types of business they're in, the internal controls that are going on. The control activities, actually the control steps in place, who's reviewing what, who has access to cash. Is the same person taking cash and recording it? That's obviously a no-no, as we'll look at. And then monitoring, who is monitoring these things and reviewing them to make sure that they're being done correctly. So auditors produce something called audit reports, you read about in the chapter. And then there's also notes inside financial statements. So they might, the company management might say something like, our management does not expect that our disclosure controls and procedures or internal controls will prevent all sorts of things. And then later on, we'll see the auditors will state some types of opinions as to what the scope of their review was, and if there's anything excluded from that review. But there's always, in these annual reports and quarterly reports, are really interesting to look at and see what they state they're reviewing, what was excluded, what their risk factors are. All those types of things are in there. So some key components of internal controls, as we looked at: the control environment, risk assessment, control activities monitoring, and information communication, depending on the reliability of the accounting information system itself. For you accounting majors or double majors, you'll take a class called Accounting Information System, and in there we'll look at types of controls, type of system setup, how information is governed and reviewed and processed to make sure that things function correctly. Here's some preventative control. Separation of duties is a huge one. Physical controls, keys and locks, that type of thing. Authorization, who can access that spreadsheet or that system in the software. Employee management, that they have the knowledge necessary to carry out their job duties, have good guidance, have good training, have good review. And the e-commerce controls, yeah, making sure the only authorized personnel can contract for the company, can sign things, can sign off on things, can order things. And And then these types of controls activities are called detective controls. So reconciliations, a bank reconciliation we'll look at later. Performance reviews, are people actually doing their job? Not taking shortcuts, not trying to hide things. And then auditing. There's internal auditors and external auditors. Internal auditors making sure that the control systems are working, and external auditors come in to review as well as an outside party. Responsibilities of top executives, making sure um, to understand what the controls are, what the job responsibilities are, and that people are doing them correctly. And these executives, they're the ones that take the final responsibility. Again, they sign their names to it, that it's been done correctly. So here's an example of that auditor's report. We have audited Live Nation, their internal control and financial data based on criteria and internal control, blah, blah, blah. In our opinion, Live Nation, in all material respects, has effective internal control over financial reporting. So all these words are meaningful in their opinion. It's not that it is a fact written in stone, but based on their professional review, not just like a social media IMO kind of thing, but in their professional opinion after reviewing it in accordance with the auditing standards, they feel that the internal controls are effective. That doesn't mean that there can't be intentional fraud, right? But outside of intentional fraud, that the internal controls are appropriate, they're in place, and they appear to be working. Again, you can't fully control for somebody committed to conducting illegal activities, so it's limited in that sense. Okay, so limitations of internal control, even with the best one, misstatements can still occur through accidents or intentionality. Collusion is the biggest risk with internal controls. It's where two or more people get together to commit fraud, right? And why that's meaningful is a lot of controls are set up to eliminate one person having access to cash usually and recording it. So they split that out. But if those two people get together and talk, well, then you've just done away with the benefit of that separation of duties, right? So that collusion is usually needed because most companies do have reasonable systems of internal control set up. But if they're colluding, they're intentionally getting around um, those checks and balances and controls to commit frauds. All right, so key point here. The internal controls refer to the company's plan to improve the accuracy, reliability of accounting information. And those 5 key components, again, that triangle image: control environment, risk assessment, control activities, monitoring, and information and communication. And that is a run through very important but pretty straightforward information on internal controls.